We were eager to find out what steering a 60-foot narrowboat would be like, so on our first day as owners we took Justine up to the winding hole above Canal Lock and back to Brighouse Basin, a distance of 1.3 miles. We had no problems going up and down the lock and did surprisingly well turning the boat around. Back at our moorings we started to realise that there was not a lot of space to stow gear and that we would have to come up with some idea for extra storage. The following day Pat cooked her first meal on board, roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. It turned out really well. Len and I started planning some extra storage space, including building a large cupboard in the engine room. Pat's brother Ronnie and Olive were supposed to arrive in the afternoon, but they didn't show up until after 9 o'clock. We started to get a bit worried, but they were okay. On the 9th we began our journey around Britain's waterways. Judith and Peter joined us in the morning for a few hours, and as Ronnie had to leave by 2 o'clock we did another short cruise up to Canal Lock and back to the basin. In the afternoon Olive, Len, Pat and I set off up the Calder and Hebble Navigation. Our first night's mooring was by the Collier's Arms in Elland. The next morning I entered Elland Lock just fine, closed the gates and opened up the paddles. I then noticed that only the front end of the boat was rising. Elland Lock has an inside footboard on the bottom gates and the tiller pin had caught under it. After Len and I quickly became experts at opening and closing paddles, I noticed the 6-inch gap in the middle of the footboard. It was designed to allow the tiller pin to ascend unobstructed. For the next 1,000 miles we travelled with a unique bend in our tiller pin. Calder Hebble Bottom Lock has an electrically operated guillotine gate that lets the water out with lots of force. The top lock seemed to be misaligned. It was once part of a 2-flight staircase built by John Brinnand, and it was remodelled by William Jessup to save water. After the locks we took a sharp right turn into Calder Hebble Basin. This is all that remains of the Halifax Canal, although I understand you can still walk the towpath into town. There were good moorings here, and we had a nice lunch at the Calder and Hebble Inn. Judith and Peter met us, and in the afternoon they cruised with us up to Sowerby Bridge. The last few miles along the Calder Valley into Sowerby Bridge is very pretty. We moored up in the terminus for the night and purchased a long throw windlass from Shire Cruisers. Definitely a required piece of equipment for the stubborn paddlers on these waterways. Peter and Judith walked back along the towpath to their car, and in the evening we joined the South Pennine Boat Club members for dinner at the Navigation Inn. We definitely recommend this pub. The next day we walked around town and checked out the infamous Tool Lane blockage that separates the Calder and Hebble from the Rochdale Canal. As a footnote, in 1996 the 20-foot deep Tool Lock and the Tool Tunnel were completed, and in 2002 the restoration of the Rochdale Canal was completed, thereby creating the Northern Pennine Ring. Olive does a bit of outside housekeeping and Pat fixes a cuppa as we make our way back to the Collier's Arms in Elland. We had dinner at an Italian restaurant. The food was good, but it was a bit expensive. Afterwards we had a nightcap in the pub. Oh yes, I learned another interesting fact today. Do not let the mooring rope hang over the stern, because there's always a hungry propeller lurking around looking for a good meal. I ended up spending a couple of hours down the weed hatch trying to untangle it. I finally gave up and had to cut it free. We made it back to Brighouse on Tuesday and stayed at the boatyard moorings for a few days. Len and I started building the new cupboard, and Pat and Olive checked out all the shops in town and found a laundromat. It didn't take us long to realise how important these places would be to us, and there weren't too many of them close to the canal. Olive and Len left us on Thursday, and it seemed strange to have the boat all to ourselves for the first time. On Friday, Peter and Judith rejoined us for a couple of days. With them was their daughter Julia and boyfriend Chris. Once again we went up to Ganny Lock and back to Brighouse, where Julia and Chris took off for home. We said our farewell to Stephen Sagar and the lads, and the four of us headed down the Calder and Hebble towards Wakefield. We soon found out about river cruising. The Calder was not in flood, but it was running very fast. It may have been the unrelenting grip I had on the tiller or the warning signs about the dangerous weir, but regrettably we didn't explore the 4-mile-long Huddersfield Broad Canal. After a while we relaxed and enjoyed the pleasant scenery as we alternated between the navigation cuts and the river. We moored up for the night by Thornhill Floodlock. Judith had bought a delicious steak and kidney pie for dinner. It was yummy. The next day we went up the Dewsbury Arm to get a pump out. It wasn't very nice. In fact, it was really cruddy. Pat walked a couple of miles around town trying to find a fit-in for the water hose without success. After we left Dewsbury, we stopped at Hornbury Bridge and had lunch at the Ship for £2.50. After Wakefield, we left the Calder and Hebble and started cruising the Aire and Calder Navigation. We moored up above Falling Lock for the night. On Sunday morning, Julia and Chris came to pick up Peter and Judith and deliver the boat phone from Stephen Bullis. We waved them goodbye as we went down Falling Lock and across the new Stanley Ferry aqueduct that crosses the River Calder. It was built in 1981. The original and more ornate one was built in 1839 and still stands alongside its replacement. We found a nice mooring the other side of the aqueduct and stayed there until Wednesday morning. I worked on the new cupboard in the engine room, and we had all sorts of problems getting service on the boat phone. Mark Ely, who originally sold the phone to Stephen, stopped by a couple of times and tried to get it working. Three things come to mind as I recall our journey down to Castleford. Firstly, the friendly lock keepers at the Man Locks. Secondly, the aroma from the sewage works as we approached the 13-foot 6-inch deep wood knock lock. And thirdly, the traffic lights at Castleford Junction. Regarding the latter, the lights were red when we arrived and no one was in the lock tower. We waited and finally decided everyone had gone home and left the lights on. Wrong decision. Just as we entered the floodlock, we heard a thunderous foghorn as a 600-tonner pulled out from its moorings to greet us. Once again we learned another interesting rule of the Waterways: obey those lights. After apologising to the lock keeper, we visited the busy industrial town of Castleford, picked up some flower pots for the top of the boat, and Pat also picked up some brushes and Humbrol paint colours. She spent many enjoyable hours painting roses and castles on our canal ware. On Wednesday morning we filled up at Charrington Brewery. No, not with beer, with diesel. The interesting thing was there was no pump there and we had to manually fill our tank using cans. Ah yes, we were still having phone problems and had 2 more visits from Mark. After watering up we got underway, went back through the big floodlock and headed for Leeds. The Aire and Calder is a commercial waterway and all the locks are operated mechanically and controlled by friendly lock keepers who call ahead to let the next lock keeper know you're heading their way. We moored up in Woodlesford and guess what? We made our first call on the boat phone. It was to Olive and Len. I was the first one to dip my foot in canal waters. After leaving Woodlesford, our plan was to visit the Thwaite Mills Industrial Museum, a canal-side flint and china stone mill built in 1872. We arrived early and a helpful gentleman informed us that the Trent Aire, a 182-foot by 18-foot effluent tanker, was on its way up and we'd be well advised to keep ahead of it. Foregoing our visit to the mill, we departed for nearby Nostrop Fall Lock. Its lights were set to green, so we entered and manoeuvred ourselves into the far corner. With no lock keeper in sight, we were fearful that the Trent Aire would come charging around the corner and convert us into a 7-foot long and 60-foot wide vessel. But our trusty lock keeper showed up in plenty of time, and we were on our way to the city of Leeds.